Donald Trump catches leaders at the G7 summit by surprise by suggesting Russia be allowed to rejoin it. The other leaders rebuffed that idea, but Mr. Trump also goes on the offensive about the trade war.
They're trying to act like, well, we fought with you in the wars. They don't mention the fact that they have trade barriers against our farmers. They don't mention the fact that they're charging almost 300% tariffs.
Meanwhile, Theresa May wants to talk trade, but is dogged by the continuing row in Cabinet over her Brexit strategy. With this summit shaping up to be a rather tense affair, we'll be looking at what might be achieved. Good evening. President Trump has lobbed the diplomatic equivalent of a hand grenade into the G7 summit in Canada by suggesting that Russia should be allowed to rejoin. Russia was expelled in 2014 after it annexed Crimea in the Ukraine. Most of the leaders gathered in Quebec were caught by surprise by the idea and have rejected it. And the atmosphere was prickly before the summit of the 7 top industrialised nations even began. There were sharp exchanges between President Trump and other leaders about the current trade war. Our North America editor, John Sopel, reports from Quebec.
One big happy family, but though they put on strange smiles for the cameras, don't be deceived. This is as bad-tempered and tense a start to the G7 as there's ever been. Watches may be the only things that are synchronised. Donald Trump was the last one into Quebec and he'll be the first one out, isolated over his protectionist trade policies. Before leaving Washington this morning, he was in no mood for compromise.
They understand, and they're trying to act like, well, we fought with you in the wars. They don't mention the fact that they have trade barriers against our farmers. They don't mention the fact that they're charging almost 300% tariffs. When it all straightens out, we'll all be in love again.
Though it's a little bit chilly at the moment in Quebec, the other G7 leaders are enraged that the US has imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium, citing national security. It brought this brusque tweet from Emmanuel Macron. The American president may not mind being isolated, but neither do we mind signing a 6-country agreement if need be, because these 6 countries represent values, they represent an economic market which has the weight of history behind it. Such is the president's isolation, this should perhaps more properly be called the G6+1. Donald Trump seriously considered not coming at all. He feels he gets lectured by the other foreign leaders on Iran, on climate change and of course on trade. And he's not a big fan of being lectured. But one area where he's doing the lecturing is on his surprise call today that Russia should be readmitted to the group.
Whether you like it or not, and it may not be politically correct, but we have a world to run. And in the G7, which used to be the G8, they threw Russia out. They should let Russia come back in, because we should have Russia at the negotiating table.
But France, Britain and Germany are saying no. The expulsion decision was made after Russia annexed Crimea. Theresa May had more recent events in mind.
We've seen malign activity from Russia in a whole variety of ways, of course, including on the streets of Salisbury in the United Kingdom. So we need to say that I think before any such conversations can take place, Russia needs to change its approach.
The Quebecois are trying to go about their daily lives as if it's business as usual. And without much optimism, so too are the other members of the G7. But it's not. There's a tough decision to make. Roll over and accept American tariffs, or retaliate and risk an all-out trade war.
And John, this summit has only just begun, but it's looking to be a fairly ill-tempered business, and Donald Trump is clearly on combative form.
Yes, and I think the tempers are pretty frayed, and I think that there's not much sign of any agreement emerging. Fiona, last year at the G7 in Sicily, they tried a softly approach, speaking kindly to the new president, trying to tutor him on the climate change arrangements. What happened after that was that Donald Trump said, no, we're going to pull America out of the Paris Accord. This year they've used rather tougher language, as we heard there in that report, over the trade war that seems to be emerging. That has got nowhere as well. And despite the European threats, Donald Trump has said in reply, take down your barriers and tariffs or we will more than match you. One important consideration in all of this is Donald Trump's domestic ratings. Among Republicans, his approval support is sky high. Among ordinary Americans, it's going up. He is not going to succumb to threats. And if you want a sign of how bad things are, it looks likely that there will be no communique of any description at the end of this G7 summit. Now, normally those communiques are an exercise in blandness. They make vanilla look edgy as a colour. If they can't even agree on something which says, broadly speaking, we want to end poverty and we want economic growth, that is a sign of how badly things have gone.
John Sobel in Quebec, thank you.